Welcome, everybody, to Theory Underground. I'm your host, David McKerracher, and today we are joined by Bryce Nance. Nance, how's it going, man?
It's going fantastic, man. I'm happy to be back in the saddle, dude. It's been a month or so, and it feels like I'm ready.
Yes, yeah, same. And we also have in the audience Christopher. Christopher, hi, how's it going, man?
Doing good. Thank you.
Awesome.
Congratulations again.
Thank you. Yeah, Christopher is our sole representative of the CMT audience. I guess Nance is also, a research cohort participant. Nance is also, but as far as like in the audience, Christopher, you're going to hold it down. And so probably every 45 minutes or so, we're going to check in with you, and you'll be able to give something back in terms of questions or contributions. But for the most part, this is going to be Nance and I modeling how to do an exegetical reading, but also trying to have fun while we go about it. And the goal always is to do 30% our own exegesis and 70% actual reading. And that the exegesis should be assuming an audience of people not present, and trying to help this be contextualized, relevant, meaningful for people who are maybe not on the wavelength, who are trying to get into it. So with all of that said, what we're reading today is Edward Bernays's Propaganda, and I have it up here on the screen. You're able to see that, right, Nance? I don't know that we actually have the same edition or anything.
No, I think mine was published in 2021. Actually, the one I have up right now.
Oh, really? Let's see. But
I also have other ones. But also, aside from any foreword or introduction, we should be good.
All right, let's just go straight into the table of contents here. I'm going to give a speed run of it. Organizing Chaos, the New Propaganda, the New Propagandists, the Psychology of Public Relations, Business and the Public, Propaganda and Political Leadership, Women's Activities and Propaganda, Propaganda for Education, Propaganda in Social Service, Art and Science, the Mechanics of Propaganda. All right. I've read this book in the past, don't remember too much of it too clearly. I was giving myself a refresher today, but I did not give myself a complete refresher. Ideally, when you do an exegetical, you should have, within the last week, given the entire book the first pass. Nance, you did give it a first pass, yesterday? How did that go for you?
Yeah, it was good. I read it all the way through once, and then I read sections of it again. And it's good. It's it's good. We should read it. It's worth reading.
All right, and then all I'll say is that he is famously Freud's nephew. That he is the one blamed for applying psychology to advertising, and he's the one who kind of comes right out and says the things that most advertising people take for granted at a sort of subliminal level, but would never say outright. And it's always enlightening to go back to the founders of disciplines or institutions and actually see them saying what they're saying clearly. Because at the end of the day, the functionaries usually don't know why things are done the way they are, and the functionaries don't matter half as much to theory as the actual people who theorized the field. And so let's get into it.
And I think this book came out before all the crazy shit he did in South America. So it's crazy that he wrote this book and said, yeah, this is what we should do. And then he turned around and did it and created propaganda that led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of indigenous people in South America.
That's the part I didn't know about. Can you,
So you want to do it now or later?
Let's leave that as a foreshadowing, and we'll get into it. Yeah, let's get into it. All right. Chapter 1: Organizing Chaos. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic societies are organized. By the way, can you look up the date this was published? Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. You got it? So basically all he's saying is propaganda is the only way that we can have a democracy.
1928 was the original publishing.
Okay, and so this is the period of what? The formation of the PMC.
Yeah, during the managerial revolution, if you will.
Yeah, this is the self-conscious development by and for the PMC. Not for capital and not for workers, but specifically for a group of self-interested careerist types who have a paternalistic relation to the working class, who don't want to see workers fighting with bosses, and who ultimately want to make things more efficient and set themselves up as the educated elite to be the people who ultimately do this sort of string pulling that he's alluding to. And it's crazy to read them in the 1920s period when they're always like saying, this is how it is. We're just realists. And I should be the consultant for your company because this is how it is. Because they're selling themselves and their function to the capitalists. Our invisible governors are, in many cases, unaware of the identity of their fellow members in the inner cabinet. They govern us by their qualities of natural leadership, their ability to supply needed ideas, and by their key position in the social structure. Whatever attitude one chooses to take toward this condition, it remains a fact that in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, a trifling fraction of our 120 million. Okay, so what now? It's like 360 or 330, somewhere in there.
330, 330, 350, something like that.
So at the time it was 120 million, who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. I want to just highlight that though the PMC nowadays loves to hate on conspiracy theories, there was a time when they invented them by saying we should actually do conspiracies against the public, right? And this is exactly what we're talking about. And the thing is they set up the institutions that the new PMC are functionaries within. The new PMC doesn't like to be historical at all. They don't like to understand their function within those institutions. They just say, oh no, we're against conspiracy theories. And then they just assert Enlightenment doctrine as though nothing's changed, as though the 20th century never happened. So whether we're talking about rad lib, progressive, or Marxists, either extreme tendency there on the left, both like to act like the 20th century didn't really happen. And I think doing so is kind of part of what we're trying to do here. So it is not usually realized how necessary these invisible governors are to the orderly functioning of our group life. In theory, every citizen may vote for whom he pleases. Our Constitution does not envisage political parties as part of the mechanism of government, and its framers seem not to have pictured to themselves the existence in our national politics of anything like the modern political machine. But the American voters soon found that without organization and direction, their individual votes cast perhaps for dozens or hundreds of candidates would produce nothing but confusion. Invisible government in the shape of rudimentary political parties arose almost overnight. Ever since then, we have agreed, for the sake of simplicity and practicality, that party machines should narrow down the field of choice to 2 candidates, or at most 3 or 4. In theory, every citizen makes up his mind on political questions or on public questions and matters of private conduct. In practice, if all men had to study for themselves the abstruse economic, political, and ethical data involved in every question, they would find it impossible to come to a conclusion about anything. Right? So in theory, we're all rational actors. In practice, there's no way we have the time and energy to do that. Therefore, we need representatives, and more important than the representatives, we actually need people behind them, ultimately feeding them the teleprompter information, the talking points, etc. We have voluntarily agreed to let an invisible government sift the data and high spot the outstanding issues so that our field of choice shall be narrowed to practical proportions. From our leaders in the media they use to reach the public, we accept the evidence and the demarcation of issues bearing upon public questions. From some ethical teacher, be it a minister, a favorite essayist, or merely prevailing opinion, we accept a standardized code of social conduct to which we conform most of the time. In theory, everybody buys the best and cheapest commodities offered to him on the market. In practice, if everyone went around pricing and chemically testing before purchasing the dozens of soaps or fabrics or brands of bread which are for sale, economic life would become hopelessly jammed. To avoid such confusion, society consents to have its choice narrowed to ideas and objects brought to its attention through propaganda of all kinds. This is, of course, the kind of consent that Rousseau and John Locke are talking about when they talk about the social contract, which is to say it's tacit consent. It's the consent of, well, you haven't left society, so you agree to go along with it. Which, of course, if you can't get out of this country, then if that doesn't really feel like an option. So it's a weird thing to do.
Love it or leave it.
Yeah, love it or leave it. And if you try to leave it, we'll put you in prison. There is consequently a vast and continuous effort going on to capture our minds in the interest of some policy or commodity or idea. It might be better to have, instead of propaganda and special pleading, committees of wise men who would choose our rulers, dictate our conduct, private and public, and decide upon the best types of clothes for us to wear and the best kinds of food for us to eat. But we have chosen the opposite method, that of open competition. We must find a way to make free competition function with reasonable smoothness. To achieve this, society has consented to permit free competition to be organized by leadership and propaganda. Some of the phenomena of this process are criticized: the manipulation of news, the inflation of personality, and the general ballyhoo by which politicians and commercial products and social ideas are brought to the consciousness of the masses. The instruments by which public opinion is organized and focused may be misused, but such organization and focusing are necessary to orderly life. You want to take it from here, Nance?
As civilization has become more complex, and as the need for invisible government has been increasingly demonstrated, the technical means have been invented and developed by which opinion may be regimented. With the printing press and the newspaper, the railroad, the telephone, telegraph, radio, and airplanes, ideas can be spread rapidly and even instantaneously over the whole of America. H.G. Wells senses the vast potentialities of these inventions when he writes in the New York Times, "Modern means of communication, the power afforded by print, telephone, wireless, and so forth, of rapidly putting through directive, strategic, or technical conceptions to a great number of cooperating centers, of getting quick replies and effective discussion, have opened up a new world of political processes. Ideas and phrases can now be given an effectiveness greater than the effectiveness of any personality and stronger than any sectional interest. The common design can be documented and sustained against perversion and betrayal. It can be elaborated and developed steadily and widely without personal, local, and sectional misunderstanding." What Mr. Wells says of political processes is equally true of commercial and social processes in all manifestations of mass activity. The groupings and affiliations of society today are no longer subject to local and sectional limitations. When the Constitution was adopted, the unit of organization was the village community, which produced the greater part of its own necessary commodities and generated its group ideas and opinions by personal contact and discussion directly among its citizens. But today, because ideas can be instantaneously transmitted to any distance and to any number of people, this geographical integration has been supplemented by many other kinds of grouping, so that persons having the same ideas and interests may be associated and regimented for common action even though they live thousands of miles apart. It is extremely difficult to realize how many and diverse are these divisions in our society. They may be social, political, economic, racial, religious, or ethical, with hundreds of subdivisions of each. In the World Almanac, for example, the following groups are listed under the A's. There are many more groups under this section. This is only a very limited list. The League to Abolish Capital Punishment, Association to Abolish War, American Institute of Accountants, Actors Equity Association, Actuarial Association of America, International Advertising Association, National Aeronautic Association, Albany Institute of History and Art, Amen Corner, American Academy in Rome, American Antiquarian Society, League for American Citizenship, American Federation of Labor, AMWORK, Rosicrucian Order, Andiron Club, American Irish Historical Association, Anti-Cigarette League, Anti-Profanity League, Archaeological Association of America, National Archery Association, Aryan Singing Society, American Astronomical Association, Ayrshire Breeders Association, Aztec Club of 1847. The American Newspaper Annual and Directory for 1928 lists 22,128 periodical publications in America.
Wait.
I have selected at random the Inns published in Chicago. What's up?
Oh, it might just be the difference in editions. So it said, at the point where it says Aztec Club of 1847, it then says, there are many more under the A section of this very limited list. You don't have that?
Aztec Club. No, man. It's straight up not in here.
Do you see the screen I'm sharing?
I can.
So yeah, so you can see it then. It's right there. It says there are many more under the A section of this very limited list. That's a weird omission for whatever edition doesn't feel the need to include that, because what he's doing is he's saying he pulled up a list of organizations. He was just reading off of like the A side. Like it goes on and on and on, obviously. So, all right.
Yeah.
I kind of missed that the first time I was listening to this, so let's carry on.
The American Newspaper Annual and Directory for 1928 lists 22,128 periodical publications in America. I have selected at random the Inns published in Chicago. They are Narod, Bohemian Daily Newspaper, Narod Polski, Polish Monthly, NARD, Pharmaceutical, National Corporation Reporter, National Culinary Progress, for hotel chefs, National Dog Journal, National Drug Clerk, National Engineer, National Grocer, National Hotel Reporter, National Income Tax Magazine, National Jeweler, National Journal of Chiropractic, National Livestock Producer, National Miller, National Nut News, National Poultry, Butter, and Egg Bulletin, National Provisioner, for Meat Packers, National Real Estate Journal, National Retail Clothier, National Retail Lumber Dealer, National Safety News, National Spiritualist, National Underwriter, The Nation's Health, Nahueños, Lithuanian Daily Newspaper, New Corner, Republican Weekly for Italians, Daily News, The New World, Catholic Weekly, North American Banker, and North American Veterinarian. The circulation of some of these publications is astonishing. The National Livestock Producer has a sworn circulation of 155,978. The National Engineer of 20,328. The New World, an estimated circulation of 67,000. The greater number of the periodicals listed, chosen at random from among 22,128, have a circulation in excess of 10,000. The diversity of these publications is evident at a glance, yet they can only faintly suggest the multitude of cleavages which exist in our society, and along which flow information and opinion carrying authority to the individual groups. Here are the conventions scheduled for Cleveland, Ohio. recorded in a single recent issue of World Convention dates, a fraction of the 5,500 conventions and rallies scheduled. The Employing Photo Engravers Association of America, the Outdoor Writers Association, the Knights of St. John, the Walter League, the National Knitted Outwear Association, the Knights of St. Joseph, the Royal Order of Sphinx, the Mortgage Bankers Association, the International Association of Public Employment Officials, the Kiwanis Club of Ohio, the American Photo Engravers Association, the Cleveland Auto Manufacturers Show, the American Society of Heating and Ventilating Engineers. Other conventions in 1928. The Association of Limb Manufacturers Association, the National Circus Fans Association of America, the American Naturopathic Association, the American Trap Shooting Association, the Texas Folklore Association, the Hotel Greeters, the Fox Breeders Association, the Insecticide and Disinfectant Association, the National Association of Egg Case and Egg Case Filler Manufacturers, the American Bottlers of Carbonated Beverages, the National Pickle Packers Association, not to mention the Terrapin Derby, most of them with banquets and orations attached. If all these thousands of formal organizations and institutions could be listed, and no complete list has ever been made, they would still represent but a part of those existing less formally, but leading vigorous lives. Ideas are sifted and opinions stereotyped in the neighborhood bridge club. Leaders assert their authority through community drives and amateur theatricals. Thousands of women may unconsciously belong to a sorority which follows the fashion set by a single society leader. Life satirically expresses this idea in the reply which it represents an American as giving to the Britisher who praises this country for having no upper and lower classes or castes. Yeah, all we have is the 400, the white-collar men, bootleggers, Wall Street barons, criminals, the DAR, the KKK, the colonial dames, the Masons, Kiwanis and Rotarians, the Knights of Columbus, the Elks, the Censors, the cognoscenti, the morons, heroes like Lindy, the WCTU, politicians, Minkendites, the Babusi, immigrants, broadcasters, and the rich and poor. Yet it must be remembered that these thousands of groups interlace John Jones, besides being a Rotarian, is a member of a church, of a fraternal order, of a political party, of a charitable organization, of a professional association, of a local chamber of commerce, of a league for or against prohibition, or of a society for or against lowering the tariff, and of a golf club. The opinions which he receives as a Rotarian he will tend to disseminate in the other groups in which he may have influence. This invisible, intertwining structure of groupings and associations is the mechanism by which democracy has organized its group mind and simplified its mass thinking.
All right.
Too deep. Yeah.
We're doing good with our 70-30 ratio. I want to stop to talk for a second about this. John Jones is probably just like it's meant to be a name that's just. It's just meant to be a generic name, right? Mm-hmm. He says John Jones, besides being a Rotarian, is member of a church, a fraternal order, a political party, a charitable organization, a professional association, a local chamber of commerce, of a league for or against prohibition, of a society for against lowering the tariff, and a golf club. Okay, that's 8? Is that 8 different things?
Eight formal belongings.
8 formal belongings. And that's outside of the informal groupings. Because obviously if John Jones wants to go hunting, John Jones is going to go with somebody from that one club, maybe a couple other people from those other clubs. Maybe John Jones likes to get together for breakfast with a couple of buddies. That's a lot of solicitude. I'm curious, do you or Christopher, I don't know if you're there, Christopher, but do either of you have close to that many kinds of groupings that you're associated with?
I could press it and come up with maybe like 3 or 4, dude.
Yeah, no, that's no for me.
That's a nope. How many of these? So, okay, let's just say Theory Club. Theory Underground is one of these. All right, Theory Club. Fuck. So Theory Underground would be one. I guess a lot of these though, like actually have, you'd pay dues, you'd be a member, you would probably have to attend a certain amount of times in the year. Like you can't just be a part of a fraternal order and then go like once every couple of years or something, right? You like if it's anything like a fraternity, then there's, you know, X amount of things that you have to do in a given month, and then X amount of optional things that you still have to do. Right, you get to like say there's 20 optional things. You have to do at least 3 of those optional things in a month. I'm just imagining that was kind of the way it was. So what do we have today? What do we have instead of this?
We have the internet. We have TV. We have celebrity worship. We have lines drawn in the sand that you cannot cross to make up for the lack of social belonging, but also social identity, because we're all so atomized. And this was written before TV, and obviously a lot's changed since then. I mean, almost 100 years ago, but you can trace the progress of this alienation. And even at the time, like with Taylorism, when they're de-skilling workers and they're kind of destroying the family or destroying the public life of citizens and of factory workers and all that shit. We don't have this type of life anymore. It's all here. It's all right fucking here on my phone or on my computer or on my TV. Or even if you think you're outside of that shit, it's in the bushes where you go, you know, post your pictures on Instagram to prove that you were out in the fucking forest. Like, that is a large part of what at least I talk about, and I think a lot of other people talk about when we talk about atomization and like this like runaway social not stagnation, but like decay.
Right.
It's not there. Like people don't think, oh, I can be a member of a fraternal group, because they don't exist. I mean, they do exist, but they're accessible to bougie motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Like real actual working people
don't have it.
It's not available.
Right. And insofar as they exist, they probably don't exist during the times that would work for most working people. They don't assume an average working class kind of schedule, because there isn't one anymore. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of stop there just to say, for CMT, for the purposes of what we are doing with critical media theory, that itself, the structure of John Jones's memberships and the organizational matrix that he exists in, that's almost like its own medium for communication, but it's one that involves real people as nodal points. You know, like in the next, we just passed it. Yeah, all the women in a sorority might have their fashion coming from this one gal, right? Well, nowadays it would be the girls in the sorority, they all follow the same TikTok people. Like they all talk about X, Y, and Z TikTokers who are like, they have opinions about her, or maybe they all have opinions about Kim K, right? And so they follow Kim Kardashian, and then they like her or they don't like her, but their fashion has something to do with a relation
it's in reference. Yeah.
Yeah. So even if it's in negation, say that it's a very conservative Catholic sorority, they probably are fashioning themselves to be a sort of counterpoint to Kim K. And then there's probably brands that are selling them that, that fashion line.
And that it's not even like a concrete or formal or recognizable belonging. Again, it's girls all across the world. And I mean, it's not just girls, it's everyone, but specifically in this case, girls all over the world, girls in Sri Lanka and London and Phoenix, Arizona, can all three be on the same shit together at the same time. And of course, it's asynchronous, and it's like they're not together, but they believe that they're together through the medium of the internet and social media and shit like that. So even these groups to which you belong are amorphous, and that you still feel lost. It's still a non-belonging, even though you invest in it in the same way as you would have these concrete groups 100 years ago.
Yeah,
maybe not the same way, but it takes the place of.
Well, the word gets around the village about you because you're in all these different groupings, and so if you broke your leg, chances are that ripples through all of these organizations. Everyone's like, shit, Christopher broke his leg. And then, like, you know, there's all these women's organizations because women didn't have to work, and women were the main civic leaders back then. And so then all of a sudden you've got care packages coming to your house and people are checking in on you and stuff like that. Well, what happens now? People are like, oh, you're doing stuff with Theory Underground? Why? Why aren't you working more? Couldn't you just work another job? Why are you doing that?
Got to get on the hustle grind set, man.
Got to get on that grind set. Yeah. All right. So I just feel like this explains a lot in terms of alienation and disenfranchisement, and I feel it hard. Like it didn't hit me the first couple of times I read this. It just hit me this time. I was like, fuck, man. I don't have any of that shit. Like, what? I don't even have. I almost joined a fraternity. I hate fraternities, but I almost joined this one because Kurt Vonnegut had been in it and my buddy Bauer was in it. And it was a relatively small one on campus, and they were, I don't know, cool guys and stuff. And then I found out it would be $250 per semester. And I was like, what? Do you guys really pay for your friends? Of course, in reality, everyone pays for activities and membership to things and access, and but at the moment it hit me just as wrong because I'd always had a lot of friends and never had to pay for shit. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? Of course, it's the institution that you're paying for. It's not the friends. And I didn't really understand that at the time. But in my past self's defense, the whole thing was sold as this is good for your career advancement because these are the relationships that you'll have for the rest of your life. But relationships coded as career advancement. And I was like, well, if the relationships are coded as career advancement, then that's not real relationships anyway, and it has nothing to do with what I'm doing. I don't know. For anthropological purposes, I probably should have done it, but here we are.
Well, yeah, we've all been flattened into value cases. So like all our relationships are turned into like career advancement, or like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Like, it is the case that for many people, they can't escape it. And they really can't. I mean, they could, but it takes a level of, I guess, awareness, situational awareness and self-awareness that most people just don't have. And it's not their fault that they don't have it because they haven't been exposed to it yet, because they are absorbed in that type of world. So
Exactly.
The opinions which he receives as a Rotarian will tend to disseminate in the other groups in which he may have influence. This invisible intertwining structure of groupings and associations is the mechanism by which democracy has organized its group mind and simplified its mass thinking. To deplore the existence of such a mechanism is to ask for a society such as never was and never will be. To admit that it easts. What? To admit that it easts.
I have the same error on mine, but it should be exists, I think.
Exists, yeah. To admit that it exists, but expect that it shall not be used, is unreasonable. Emil Ludwig presents Napoleon as ever on the watch for indications of public opinion, always listening to the voice of the people, a voice which defies calculation. Do you know, he said in those days, what amazes me more than all else? The impotence of force to organizing anything. It is the purpose of this book to explain the structure of the mechanism that controls the public mind and to tell how it is manipulated by the special pleader who seeks to create public acceptance for a particular idea or commodity. It will attempt at the same time to find the due place in the modern democratic scheme for this new propaganda and to suggest its gradually evolving code of ethics and practice.
Boom. Chapter 1. Done. You know, I'm going to kill you, motherfucker. There's this fly flying around me, and I just can't stand these greasy bastards. All right, Chapter 2, the new propaganda. In the days when kings were kings, Louis the 14th made his modest remark. Can you read that?
L'état c'est moi.
L'état c'est moi. After a few of these French sessions with the Multilingualism Club, I'll be able to at least pronounce things. He was nearly right. Do you know what that means? L'état c'est moi.
The state, it is I.
Really?
The state, l'état c'est moi. The state, it is I. It's not in your text?
Your French is so good you now know that? Or your text tells you. No, it doesn't.
It's in the text.
It doesn't tell me in this version. Okay. He was nearly right, but times have changed. The steam engine, the multiple press, and the public school, that trio of the Industrial Revolution, have taken the power away from kings and given it to the people. The people actually gained power, which the king lost for economic power, tends to draw after it political power. The people actually gained power, which the king lost. Period. For economic power tends to draw after it political power. And the history of the Industrial Revolution shows how the power passed from the king and the aristocracy to the bourgeoisie. Universal suffrage and universal schooling reinforced this tendency, and at last even the bourgeoisie stood in fear of the common people, for the masses promised to become king. Today, however, a reaction has set in. The minority has discovered a powerful help in influencing majorities. It has been found possible so to mold the mind of the masses that they will throw their newly gained strength in the desired direction. In the present structure of society, this practice is inevitable. Whatever of social importance is done today, whether in politics, finance, manufacture, agriculture, charity, education, or other fields, must be done with the help of propaganda. Propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. Damn. I'm going to quote that and put it in the document I have going here that I'm going to share to Nance. And actually, Christopher, do you want access to it as well? I can add you as well. Basically, the document it's called Bernay's Receipts, and we're just putting the key quotations in here. And I would say most of these are just what we would call relevant to CMT. But if we need to start another category, we will do so. So for now, I'll just start this category. I'm going to go ahead and add Nance. And until I hear back from Christopher, I was just going to add Nance for now. Let's see. So anyway, propaganda is the executive wing, the executive arm of the invisible government. All right. Universal literacy was supposed to educate the common man to control his environment. Once he could read and write, he would have a mind fit to rule. So ran the democratic doctrine. But instead of a mind, universal literacy has given him rubber stamps. Rubber stamps inked with advertising slogans, with editorials, with published scientific data, with the trivialities of the tabloids and the platitudes of history, but quite innocent of original thought. Each man's rubber stamps are the duplicates of millions of others, so that when those millions are exposed to the same stimuli, all receive identical imprints. Now, is this rubber stamp thing just a metaphor he's using?
Yeah.
Okay. And so he's just talking about how everybody's thoughts are copied and pasted. He's talking about how everybody's thoughts become scripted. It may seem an exaggeration to say that the American public gets most of its ideas in this wholesale fashion. The mechanism by which ideas are disseminated on a large scale is propaganda, in the broad sense of an organized effort to spread a particular belief or doctrine. I am aware that the word propaganda carries to many minds an unpleasant connotation, yet whether in any instance propaganda is good or bad depends upon the merit of the cause urged and the correctness of the information published. In itself, the word propaganda has certain technical meanings which, like most things in this world, are neither good nor bad, but custom makes them so. I find the word defined in Funk and Wagnall's dictionary in 4 ways. 1. A society of cardinals, the overseers of foreign missions, also the College of the Propaganda at Rome, founded by Pope Urban VIII in 1627 for the education of missionary priests, Sacred College de Propaganda Fide. 2. Hence any institution or scheme for propagating a doctrine or system. 3. Effort directed systematically toward the gaining of public support for an opinion or a course of action. And 4th, the principles advanced by a propaganda. The Scientific American, in a recent issue, pleads for the restoration of respectable usage of that fine old word propaganda. There is no word in the English language, it says, whose meaning has been so sadly distorted as the word propaganda. The change took place mainly during the late war, when the term took on a decidedly sinister complexion. This is still quoted. If you turn to the Standard Dictionary, you will find that the word was applied to a congregation or society of cardinals for the care and oversight of foreign missions, which was What? This is just what I read, isn't it? Oh, no, it's just repeating it, yeah. Anyway, it was applied also to the College of the Propaganda at Rome that was founded by Pope Urban VIII for the education of the missionary priests. Hence, in later years, the word came to be applied to any institution or scheme of propagating a doctrine or system. This is all in Scientific America. Judged by this definition, we can see that in its true sense, propaganda is a perfectly legitimate form of human activity. Any society, whether it be social, religious, or political, which is possessed of certain beliefs and sets out to make them known, either by the spoken or written words, is practicing propaganda. Truth is mighty and must prevail, and if any body of men believe that they have discovered a valuable truth, it is not merely their privilege, but their duty to disseminate that truth. If they realize, as they quickly must, that this spreading of the truth can be done upon a large scale and effectively only by organized effort, they will make use of the press and the platform as the best means to give it wide circulation. Propaganda becomes vicious and reprehensive only when its authors consciously and deliberately disseminate what they know to be lies, or when they aim at effects which they know to be prejudicial to the common good. This quote is still going on from Scientific America. It's paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, and in contemporary publishing standards, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to do these giant quotes because then they'll accuse you of plagiarism and you can get sued. Anyway, I guess it was fine back then. That's why they used to have good books. Propaganda, in its proper meaning, is a perfectly wholesale word of honest parentage and with an honorable history. The fact that it should today be carrying a sinister meaning merely shows how much of the child remains in the average adult. A group of citizens writes and talks in favor of a certain course of action in some debatable question, believing that it is promoting the best interest of the community. Propaganda? Not a bit of it. Just a plain, forceful statement of truth. But let another group of citizens express opposing views, and they are promptly labeled with the sinister name of propaganda. What is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, says a wise old proverb. Let us make haste to put this fine old word back where it belongs and restore its dignified significance for the use of our children and our children's children. End quote. So he never says who the author was. He just says it was Scientific America, which is, by the way, kind of a propagandistic thing for him to do. He could have published this in Scientific America. We don't know. He might just literally be quoting himself. It could have been an opinion piece. You know what I mean? There could have been an ongoing argument over propaganda as a term. You'll notice that so far, he's never actually taken seriously the people for whom this word carries negative connotations. He doesn't ever honor or dignify the working class concerns over the fact that the public is basically nothing outside of a propaganda field. The extent to which propaganda shapes the progress of affairs about us may surprise even well-informed persons. Can you take it from here? I'm going to kill this fly.
God damn. Okay, where?
Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. I was like, it's the extent to which propaganda shapes the progress of affairs about us may surprise even well-informed persons.
Nevertheless, it is only necessary to look under the surface of the newspaper for a hint as to propaganda's authority over public opinion. Page 1 of the New York Times on the day these paragraphs are written contains 8 important news stories. 4 of them are propaganda. The casual reader accepts them as accounts of spontaneous happenings. But are they? Here are the headlines. 12 nations warn China real reform must come before they give relief. Pritchett reports Zionism will fail. Realty men demand a transit inquiry. Our living standard highest in history, says Hoover report. Take them in order. The article on China explains the joint report of the Commission on Extraterritoriality in China, presenting an exposition of the power stand in the Chinese muddle. What it says is less important than what it is. It was made public by the State Department today with the purpose of presenting to the American public a picture of the State Department's position. Its source gives its authority, and the American public tends to accept and support the State Department view. The report of Dr. Pritchett, a trustee of the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace, is an attempt to find the facts about this Jewish colony in the midst of a restless Arab world. When Dr. Pritchett's survey convinced him that in the long run, Zionism would bring more bitterness and more unhappiness both for the Jew and for the Arab, this point of view was broadcast with all the authority of the Carnegie Foundation, so that the public would hear and believe. The statement by the president of the Real Estate Board of New York and Secretary Hoover's report are similar attempts to influence the public toward an opinion. These examples are not given to create the impression that there is anything sinister about propaganda. They are set down rather to illustrate how conscious direction is given to events, and how the men behind these events influence public opinion. As such, they are examples of modern propaganda. At this point, we may attempt to define propaganda. Beware the professional propagandist. Modern propaganda is a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group. This practice of creating circumstances and of creating pictures in the minds of millions of persons is very common. Virtually no important undertaking is now carried on without it, whether that enterprise be building a cathedral, endowing a university, marketing a moving picture, floating a large bond issue, or electing a president. Sometimes the effect on the public is created by a professional propagandist, sometimes by an amateur deputied for the job. The important thing is that it is universal and continuous, and in its sum, regimenting the public mind every bit as much as an army regiments the bodies of its soldiers. So vast are the numbers of minds that can be regimented, and so tenacious are they when regimented, that a group at times offers an irresistible pressure before which legislators, editors, and teachers are helpless. The group will cling to its stereotype, as Walter Lippmann calls it, making of those supposedly powerful beings, the leaders of public opinion, mere bits of driftwood in the surf. When an imperial wizard, sensing what is perhaps hunger for an ideal, offers a picture of a nation all Nordic and nationalistic, the common man of the older American stock, feeling himself elbowed out of his rightful position and prosperity by the newer immigrant stocks, grasps the picture that fits so neatly with his prejudices and makes it his own. He buys the sheet and pillowcase costume and bands with his fellows by the thousands into a huge group of powerful enough to swing state elections and to throw a ponderous monkey wrench into a national convention. In our present social organization, approval of the public is essential to any large undertaking. Hence, a laudable movement may be lost unless it impresses itself upon the public mind. Charity, as well as business, and politics and literature for that matter, have had to adopt propaganda, for the public must be regimented into giving money just as it must be regimented into tuberculosis prophylaxis. The Near East Relief, the Association for the Improvement of the Conditions of the Poor of New York, and all the rest have to work on public opinion just as though they had tubes of toothpaste to sell. We are proud of our diminishing infant death rate, and that too is the work of propaganda. Propaganda does not exist on all sides of us. Propaganda does exist on all sides of us, and it does change our mental pictures of the world. Even if this be unduly pessimistic, and that remains to be proven, the opinion reflects a tendency that is undoubtedly real. In fact, its use is growing as its efficiency in gaining public support is recognized. This evidently indicates the fact that anyone with sufficient influence can lead sections of the public, at least for a time, and for a given purpose. Formerly, the rulers were the leaders. They laid out the course of history by the simple process of doing what they wanted. And if nowadays the successors of the rulers, those whose position or ability gives them power, can no longer do what they want without the approval of the masses, they find in propaganda a tool increasingly powerful in gaining that approval. Therefore, propaganda is here to stay. It was, of course, the astounding success of propaganda during World War I that opened the eyes of the intelligent few in all departments of life to the possibilities of regimenting the public mind. The American government and numerous patriotic agencies developed a technique that, to most persons accustomed to bidding for public acceptance, was new. They not only appealed to the individual by means of every approach, visual, graphic, and auditory, to support the national endeavor, but they also secured the cooperation of the key men in every group, persons whose mere word carried authority to hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers. Thus, they automatically gained the support of fraternal, religious, commercial, patriotic, social, and local groups whose members took their opinions from their accustomed leaders and spokesmen, or from the periodical publications they were accustomed to read and believe. At the same time, the manipulators of patriotic opinion made use of the mental cliches and the emotional habits of the public to produce mass reactions against the alleged atrocities, the terror and the tyranny of the enemy. It was only natural, after the war ended, that intelligent persons should ask themselves whether it was possible to apply a similar technique to the problems of peace. As a matter of fact, the practice of propaganda since the war has assumed very different forms from those prevalent 20 years ago. This new technique may fairly be called the new propaganda. It takes account not merely of the individual, nor even of the mass mind alone, but also and especially of the anatomy of society, with its interlocking group formations and loyalties. It sees the individual not only as a cell in the social organism, but as a cell organized into the social unit.
Ooh.
Touch a nerve at a sensitive spot, and you get an automatic response from certain specific members of the organism.
Okay. I think that bears repeating, and then let's check in here on Christopher. Christopher, are you there? Cool, man. Christopher, you want to reread this quote right here? I've got it highlighted.
It takes account not merely of the individual, nor even of the mass mind alone, but also and especially of the anatomy of society, with its interlocking group formations and loyalties. It sees the individual not only as a cell in the social organism, but as a cell organized into the social unit. Touch a nerve at a sensitive spot, and you get an automatic response from certain specific members of the organism.
So I'm gonna say, like, as far as how this relates to CMT, that matrix of organizations, the institutional matrix of John Jones. I think that John Jones should become like our shorthand as a jargon. so that it doesn't signify an individual, because then we would just say Joe Sixpack, right? That's what Chomsky calls him. It's just Joe Sixpack. But no, John Jones should be the shorthand for a person who's probably got at least 8 formal institutions that they are a part of. Or I don't even like institutions, societies. They're a part of 8 societies. Like the Rotary Club, the church, the fraternal order, the political party, the charitable organization, the professional association, the local chamber of commerce, the league for or against prohibition, or a society for or against lowering the tariff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nowadays, it's like, oh, this person's into Doctor Who. That's one consumer demographic that they belong to. They also like Harry Potter. That's one that they belong to. But they also hate J.K. Rowling. So then they also belong to BreadTube. And so then there's probably like 3 or 4 other consumer demographics or hashtags that they subscribe to. But what are the material differences between belonging to consumer demographics that are signified by hashtags and belonging to formal societies? And I want to start with that question with the two of you, and then I want to move back to this quote again and kind of elaborate on it using this, where he's going with this. So what are some of the differences that come to mind as far as between these two things?
Belonging to a society is, I mean, aside from the fact that it's exceedingly rare nowadays, it's based in like life and agency and like, what are you doing? Like, oh, I give a shit about my local community, so I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce. Like, it's predicated on you, and I fucking hate it, but like it's you exercising your agency. It's you acting on the world, in the world. Whereas consumer demographics are just like, oh, I like to sit back in my underwear and watch skateboarding videos. Like, that's a consumer demographic I belong to. And so that doesn't tell you anything about me other than that I fucking like I like this commodity. But people invest in it so heavily, and it takes away not even your agency, but it takes away like it erases the fact that you are inhabiting like you're no longer you are a member of this group, this type, this category, whatever. But that's not me. Whereas in the past, if I was a member of a group, that does tell you something about me. And it is kind of constitutive of who I am in my own environment, my own situatedness, and what I'm doing in the world. Now we're all being flattened to just different flavors, or, it's the same thing, just slap a different veneer on it. By creating ourselves by just kind of collecting different consumer, groups.
What do you got, Christopher?
I was gonna say, like, I agree with Nance. Like, it's kind of like a mask people put on sometimes. So it just depends if, like, for his example, the guy watching the skateboarding, like, there's my skateboarder mask on, and then if you meet somebody who's into skateboarding, you kind of connect and things like that. But it's more like acquaintance level, where maybe like the Lions Club or something like that is, hey, we care about the future and we want to help the youth and stuff like that. So they believe, like he's saying, the activism. And I think like the Harry Potter people and stuff like that just want kind of like to be seen. It's like they're like, oh, I'm Harry Potter, or I'm this person. And it's like they're kind of like LARPing in a sense together. in a way. I mean, we all are, but the where I was thinking about like motorcycle gangs and how they wear like the shit on the leathers and stuff, and that's kind of like more a fusion of the two, but some of them are political as well. So it just gives that sense like, hey, I have power in group out group, which they both have, but just the power dynamics I think are different in a sense. If
The
that makes
power
sense. So
dynamics being different
yeah.
is a really useful thing here. So obviously an association or a society could still have it, either the entire thing is LARPing or it's got members who are LARPing. Are you just saying that it's a difference in degree and it's a lot more probable that a person is going to be LARPing if they are finding their identity through a consumer demographic on the internet?
Yeah, in a sense, because it's like, let's say you're big into Star Wars or something, and you buy a lot of the paraphernalia and you meet up and you have fun, and it could be like you can make friends, you could even meet like a significant other that way, but you're not joining like the Jedi Order to try to pool your money together to get a park made or have a community watch or anything like that. So I think it's just more LARPing in the sense that it's like, or LARPing in the sense that it's like, this is my persona, this is who I am. Because I think Americans are big on this. Like, I've done it too, like the stickers on the water bottle. And it's like somebody could be like, I power lift or I do this. And it's like, that's their identity costume they're putting on. So that's kind of what I mean more so in the LARPing. It's like, today my or for 20 minutes I have my skateboarder avatar or I have my philosophy avatar on. So it is a part of who you are somewhat, but I think we identify as consumers. Like all the try on haul videos girls do on Instagram and things like that. That's a certain club and it's something I don't fully understand, but there's tons of them. So they'll do a response video like, oh, this is how she styled the top and things like that. But it's they're more doing it to be associated with the brand and to be seen than I think that like, hey, most people who whether they're super conservative, even somebody like outside an abortion clinic like marching and they're like super pissed off, they may be part of like their like pro-life club and they think they're making a difference. So I think it's more like power dynamics in that sense. Like one's actively trying to change something or express a state and a belief in the world, where the other is more so like, hey, look at me, this is what I'm into. If you're into it too, that's cool. Let's talk about it and be friends.
Yeah, because we don't have power to do anything other than that anymore. I do like that power.
Power and dynamics. One gives you the illusion of power, where the other one just kind of doesn't care as much.
Yeah, for sure.
So they're both LARPing in a sense, just different degrees.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you could everything is a LARP to some degree. True. But yeah, when we're removed from any actual power to act in the world and on the world, then it all becomes, we're just playing dress up.
Right.
Whereas with having concrete real world organizations that do real things, and it might all be bullshit, it might not, whatever, but at least you're doing something. At least it's real in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And so, by the way, I think Anne has just joined us. Welcome, Anne. She's probably getting her audio set up right now. Oh, let's see. Can I get it? Can I get this fucking fly? I think I got it. All right. Anne, can you hear us? She might be like driving. My brother was trying to get a hold of her so that she could bring him his lunchbox because he's working at the mill and he forgot his lunchbox. But
there you go.
Let's see. Chat said something. Oh, that was Christopher earlier. All right. So what I have here is societies versus consumer demographics. The first distinction I made, you'll see that I'm kind of adding my own words here. I have suited up versus undies and ice cream. That is a discovery on the part of Nance. He had to spend a lot of time eating ice cream and jacking off, calling himself a real leftist before he realized it was a consumer activity.
Yeah.
Then him saying it made me realize, wait, other people can see me for what I am. Oh shit, because I thought nobody knew. I thought everybody thought I was actually, doing things. Next distinction is tells you about you versus flattened flavors, doesn't tell you about you. But then I wrote in parentheses, but it does, in all caps, because I think that there's a little bit more distance created within the institution that you show up in real life for. A way of saying that is like people on the internet over-identify with these things. Whereas if you just go to the Chamber of Commerce meetings and you have 8 other things that you're doing in a given month, you don't over-identify with the Chamber of Commerce. And you might have amicable relations or allies there who are actually a part of, let's say that you're with the group for the abolition of abortion, right? But you've got amicable relations with someone at the Chamber of Commerce who's fighting for changing something in the city with you, but that person's actually pro-choice, right? That couldn't exist on the internet, though, right? And so there's like this sort of like the flattened flavors things makes everything more black and white, which makes things less multipolar, which makes things left versus right. Everything gets collapsed into a very simple binary. And so so while the society tells you something about you, the consumer demographic can over-determine everything else. And it does so in a way that isolates you from the people who live on your same street. Right? The people who live on your same street, you don't even want to talk to them. You'd prefer to go online and talk shit about them. And so the idea that the society, belonging to a Chamber of Commerce group, belonging to the Rotary Club, belonging to a pro-life or pro-choice club, all of these different kind of communities, it does tell you something about you. But it's not so much something that's just happening at the explicit conscious level. The kind of belonging that you have in a consumer demographic, there's so much explicit content that you're kind of taking too seriously. And there's all this unconscious referential totality of equipment, signification, relations with others that are complicated and not something that could be spelled out very easily, not something that could be articulated very easily, but that nonetheless people in that group get it, right? And so that society gets it. Now, the objects of concern, what everybody's focused on, no one would be able to focus on that if it wasn't for the referential equipmental totality of signification fading into the background. But the fact is that you share that in spatio-temporal reality with these people in these old societies, meaning that, people have to get there and they have to get there on time, which means that they build their lives around these societies, which is the opposite. In the consumer demographic, it's always there. You didn't miss anything. You'll never miss anything. Everything is always available on demand, and you'll never miss a goddamn thing, right? It's always there for you. So I don't want to say like they're completely different worlds, but I'd say like these are such big differences in emphasis that it's like definitely going to be important for thinking about CMT. As far as LARPing goes, under LARPing, we have no leaders. I added these. No leaders. That's a big one, right? Because on the other side, you have leaders who are tested by the real. Leaders who are tested by the real is to say, like, of course they get voted into place. Of course, everybody has their imaginary identifications. Of course, there's like the whole symbolic framework of how the society functions, but they are tested by the real, meaning that it's not just in their heads, and that the leaders have to make real decisions, and that those real decisions have real consequences because they get voted into place, or people stop showing up, or people protest. And the thing is those leaders, part of the real that they're tested by is, let's just say that you're standing at a podium and you're talking, and you're reading the room, and you realize you lost everybody. You see it on their faces, and you might see concern on some of those faces, whereas some of those other faces might tell you something different than concern. And it makes you have to kind of, recalibrate your entire approach mid-talking. And a lot of that could be happening at the unconscious level. That's not happening when you are an influencer working within a consumer demographic. An influencer working within a consumer demographic doesn't get tested by the real. The influencer gets tested by the algorithm and people's immediate impulses. And we'll come back to people's immediate impulses in a second. Okay. I also wanted to add clicking, scrolling, and referencing become more important than sharing actual space. I've experienced this a lot of times because I've done a lot of organizing. There are people who show up who never talk, and they don't want to, but they show up, and they show up more regularly than a lot of the people who hog all the space talking. They would just be invisible on the internet. But those people are usually the backbone of things. I think I got that one. Oh yeah, it fell right on my piece of paper. Okay, I gotta fly. And another one, I'm on a streak. So this is kind of the difference between spatiotemporal and it's all there on demand. And being there physically is a louder proof of membership than anything you can say. So even if a person is not LARPing, the fact that they have to say so much just to be counted as present makes it kind of LARPy, because real power exists when people are quiet. Real power exists when people inhabit space and they have a sort of self-certainty about that inhabitation. And the thing is if you've been there reticent for 6 months and then you stand up and you speak your piece, everyone shuts the fuck up to listen because they realize, like, you've been there the whole time and no one was checking in on you, and now here they get to hear what you actually have to say. But if the person has been sitting there for 6 months, never said anything, and then they speak up in, let's just say, a Vosh stream or a Hassan Piker stream or a Destiny stream, or in the comment section of a Thought Slime YouTube video, or the Surf's YouTube video or something. I'm just using BreadTube influencers as my examples here. But if a person's been there for 6 months and then they actually stand up to speak, guess what? They're instantly crowded out by all the noise of everybody else. And nobody else has to shut up and listen in that moment. And you speaking up has no weight. And then you could say, I've been here for 6 months and I've done this and I've done that and I've been thinking this and that. You've already lost everybody because you've already spoken too much, because everyone's attention spans are so short, and they're there for what they're there for on demand. They want what they're there for, and that's it. And what they want is ultimately just to engage with that influencer a little bit to get some of that attention. They don't give a fuck about you, right? The leader in the society is contingent upon the people in the society. And so if someone stands up and they've been around for a while, even if they haven't had like an active voice, their voice is kind of charged with extra weight because now they are speaking. I think that's all lost. And I think that people, you listen to activists now, they really want to be able to have a voice. They really want to be heard. They really don't feel seen. And the thing is they want it so bad because systemically, structurally, none of us can actually be heard, because if everybody's babbling all the time in idle chatter, then nobody even has the capability of what Heidegger calls reticence, which is the ability to listen, to decipher, to judge, right? So there's this whole thing happening there that I think has to be thought through more. And then finally, the last one was sharing space with difference versus no difference. And I kind of got to that in the beginning by talking about in the Chamber of Commerce meetings, you've got allies who might actually be, and opponents from the standpoint of other organizations that you are in, but that doesn't really matter. That hasn't overdetermined your concerns for good roads and sharing a weekend. Right? In a society where everybody actually goes to things and does stuff and belongs to 8 different societies within a month, the weekend is sacred. In a society where everything's always available on demand, supposedly, nothing is actually available ever. And so there's no common stake for people who do have radical ideological or aesthetic differences. So, all right. Now, taking it back to this quote, though, it says, it takes account not merely of the individual, and it being the new propaganda, takes account not merely of the individual, nor even the mass mind alone, but also and especially of the anatomy of society with its interlocking group formations and loyalties, Jim Jones. It sees the individual not only as a cell in the social organism, but as a cell organized into the social unit, right? So you're not trying to reach out to individuals, you're trying to game social units. Touch a nerve at a sensitive spot, and you get an automatic response from certain specific members of the organism. I took this to potentially be the most important thing, because I think a lot of what's going on with like where you go, well, why is that news? And maybe it's something that outrages people and no one's really sure why it outrages people. I think that there are people who see themselves as doing something good for the world because they believe that their ideology needs to win, who really, they touch nerves in a sociological way. Let's poke this nerve in these different counties and see what the reactions there are. And actually, they have social scientists to then decipher that data, right? Most psychology and most sociology is funded by advertising. And if you looked a few layers back, I think you're probably going to find the deep state in almost all cases when it comes to education. And so the information that serves advertising is also going to serve political agendas just as much. And that's one of the wonderful things about Bernay, is just coming out and defending the term propaganda. By defending the term, instead of giving it a sort of nuanced approach, he collapses the difference between political propaganda and advertising commodities. The interests of state and capital are at times juxtaposed, but there are certain issues where they are 100% aligned. And that complete alignment is always going to be on manipulating the population in a way that makes it predictable, which is a way of simplifying and flattening the population so as to get more predictable results. So what are a couple of things that come to mind as touchy nerve kind of issues where if you say something, you're pretty sure you'll get a response on the internet?
All the id pol bullshit. And I, like, not to say that it's always bullshit. Like, I'm sure there are times when it does matter, but the fact that, like, every time I open my news app, there's a multiple headlines about just identity politics bullshit. Someone was offended, someone got fired, someone's in trouble, someone's this, someone's that. Like, none of that shit matters. None of that fucking shit matters. I don't want to read it. I always click show me less of this, and they keep feeding it to me. They keep fucking feeding it to me, because that is the...
There is no less.
There is no less.
No, this is why pushing the downvote button or the show less buttons tells the algorithms this gets this gets them at the level of their drive. This gets them at the level of their jouissance. This gets them at the level of, oh, your higher self thinking for itself, going, I'm not going to be duped this time, motherfucker. Show me less. The algorithm goes, that motherfucker's drive is fiending for this kind of content. Okay, we'll make sure to give it more. And then it's all experimenting with ways of doing that, right? So this touch a nerve at a sensitive spot and you get an automatic response from certain specific members of the organism. And thinking about the members of the organism not as individuals, but as social units that individuals belong to, that's everything. And so is it weird that some grifter like Dave Rubin comes along, right? No, it doesn't require genius to know, oh, every time someone pokes that hornet's nest, it goes fucking crazy. Oh, okay. I'm just going to go over and stick my finger in it and keep my finger there because that's going to get me mad street cred from everybody who thinks, wow, those hornets are crazy. Right? So, lobbying groups have to lobby the government, have to put the pressure on individuals who hold office, but they also work with their own public arm, right? Like they all have their own public facing arm, or they work with other people who do. And so let's just say that keeping eggs associated with milk, with bacon, with pancakes, keeping that kind of just like this all American nexus. It came out of the head of advertisers. It was advertised to the public this way. They found individuals within these social organisms in every city and town who were influential. They sponsored them. They put on meals for everybody. They showed them this is how we do, right? Well, now there's not even individuals who might say, fuck that shit. I would never wear that, or I would never represent that, right? Because I actually represent a diverse community of people who actually live here, and that's just not going to fly. That check from the reel is removed, and now it's just the atomization of the individuals who are in that flattened space, right? So, all right.
I don't want to derail, but real quick, when I was in school, I think I was in junior high, or maybe I was high school, I don't know. I think Coca-Cola came out with Surge.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like a guerrilla marketing campaign, and it might be the first time that I like encountered that and was kind of aware of what was going on, but also kind of wasn't, because I was like not whatever. But they like went to the schools and gave out like cases of Surge.
Oh, shit.
Like legitimately brought pallets of fucking this sugary drink that probably gives you cancer, and just like dropped it off and were like, take this shit home, kids. And then like Circle K and 7-Eleven would just give this shit away. Like they just fucking gave you soda for free. And it went on for probably like 6 months.
It had free with the cap too. Every time we bought one, for the most part, when we took the cap off, like at Blockbuster,
get another one.
We'd be like, "Oh, we get another one." Oh shit!
Yeah, dude. And they were just giving this shit away for free. And I think they like took it to the skate park, like the local skate park, and like they were hip to like, oh yeah, man, we got to get these kids hooked on our shit, like they do with everything else. But that was like the first time I was kind of aware of it. Like they were giving kids free soda.
Yeah, nothing's free.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing's fucking free. But they wanted to get us hooked on it so that eventually when they started charging for it, we would be like, oh, I want Surge. And yeah, that's just I guess a funny.
I remember that.
funny
I
story.
remember it. I remember Surge, man. I remember the free bottle cap. You just gave me a piece of my life back. I completely forgot about that shit. And I think that I had Surge before Mountain Dew. Like, Surge made me like Mountain Dew for a while. Right? Because
there
Surge...
was a sperm count rumor, too. Like, when we were kids. It was, like, going around about it. So we really wanted it. We were like, oh,
that's not true.
Like, no, but it was like, you're young.
I found out the hard way. I thought it was true. That's why I fucking had so many kids so early. I was like, yeah, bitch, I'm impotent now.
Oh, nope. So you thought it lowered sperm count. I think I remember that.
They said that, and then like Mountain Dew. So we're all like,
yeah, lower your sperm count, have unprotected sex, do cocaine behind Circle K, suck a lot of dicks, do it all. That's the postmodern utopia, dude. We won.
Okay.
I think Anne just dropped out. She was upset.
This.
Sorry, Anne.
Google's annulments.
I laughed. No, Anne would never. She's probably driving and lost service. Okay, so because there's a lot of losing service on this way on the way to where she's going. So, all right, that wasn't a derailment. That was perfect. And you call it guerrilla. Can you explain why?
Because they had like a street team. Like they had like seniors from the high school that they had merch and like fucking jackets and like fucking cool shit, like lighters that had the Surge logo on them. And keep in mind, these were high school kids that they were giving this swag to. But like it was like a street team, kind of like, I guess now that's the only type of marketing. Maybe not. But like, traditional marketing is more rare nowadays because everything's on socials and everything has a street team. But at the time, it was kind of novel to have like just random motherfuckers from the neighborhood were all of a sudden brand representatives.
Those are role models too. The
Monster
Energy like, shit. So like it was like them making fun of it.
Yeah.
So I think we can continue reading at this point, but I guess for now, I'm getting a lot more out of this third time than I did the first couple times. That goes without, of course, that goes without saying. But I mean, like way more. Like it really helps to be reading this aloud with a couple people from the actual cohort. So you're all a part of the actual research cohort here, and that's why I'm getting more out of it. And so I just want you to know that you're both instrumental in this process, and so thank you. And if anybody else is watching this in the future, when other people are watching this in the future, I want to encourage you all to take notes if you can, to stop every once in a while and think about what you're hearing. If you're feeling agitated or anxious or excited or inspired, pause it and take a walk, or sit down and write in a fury, like as though you're going to post it to your social media or to a blog or in a book. But don't. Just do it for yourself. Right? Trick yourself into writing for yourself to process these thoughts. And of course, if any of that turns out to be something that you think is going to be a good contribution to the conversation with the research cohort, add it to the forum, which is currently nothing. There's nothing happening in the CMT forum. It's like we're having the best. It's like arguably the most exciting thing we've ever done, but all of it's like happening when we're actually in Zoom. And then but I know that, at least for a few of us, this is percolating into what's going to become banger-ass posts, killer fucking articles, and eventually books. So we'll keep going, though. I'll read from the top. Business offers graphic examples of the effect that may be produced upon the public by interested groups, such as textile manufacturers losing their markets. This problem arose... Hold on. Here we go. This problem arose not long ago when the velvet manufacturers were facing ruin because their product had long been out of fashion. Analysis showed that it was impossible to revive a velvet fashion within America. Anatomical hunt for the vital spots. Paris, obviously, but yes and no. Paris is the home of fashion. Lyons, is that how you say that?
Lions.
Lyons is the home of silk. The attack had to be made at the source. It was determined to substitute purpose for chance and to utilize the regular sources for fashion distribution and to influence the public from these sources. A velvet fashion service, openly supported by the manufacturers, was organized. Its first function was to establish contact with the Lyons manufactories and the Paris courtiers. You know how to say that?
Couturiers.
Couturiers, to discover what they were doing, to encourage them to act on behalf of velvet, and to help in the proper exploitation of their wares. An intelligent Parisian was enlisted in the work. He visited Lanvin and Worth, Agnes and Patou, and others, and induced them to use velvet in their gowns and hats. It was he who arranged for the distinguished countess this or duchess that. Oh, sorry, I thought there was a missing period. Fuck. All right, I'll reread this. It was he who arranged for the distinguished countess this or duchess that to wear the hat or the gown. And as for the presentation of the idea to the public, the American buyer or the American woman of fashion was simply shown the velvet creations in the atelier of the dressmaker and the milliner. She bought the velvet because she liked it and because it was in fashion. The editors of the American magazines and fashion reporters of the American newspapers, likewise subjected to the actual, although created, circumstance, reflected it in their news, which in turn subjected the buyer and the consumer here to the same influences. The result was that what was first a trickle of velvet became a flood. A demand was slowly but deliberately created in Paris and America. A big department store, aiming to be a style leader, advertised velvet gowns and hats on the authority of the French courtiers and quoted original cables received from them. The echo of the new style note was heard from hundreds of department stores throughout the country, which wanted to be style leaders too. Bulletins followed dispatches. The mail followed the cables. And the American woman traveler appeared before the ship news photographers in velvet gown and hat. The created circumstances had their effect. Fickle fashion has veered to velvet, was one newspaper comment, and the industry in the United States again kept thousands busy. The new propaganda, having regard to the constitution of society as a whole, not infrequently serves to focus and realize the desires of the masses. A desire for a specific reform, however widespread, cannot be translated into action until it is made articulate and until it has exerted sufficient pressure upon the proper law-making bodies. Millions of housewives may feel that manufactured foods deleterious to health should be prohibited, but there is little chance that their individual desires will be translated into effective legal form unless their half-expressed demand can be organized, made vocal, and concentrated upon the state legislature or upon the federal Congress in some mode which will produce the results they desire. Whether they realize it or not, they call upon propaganda to organize and effectuate their demand. And I would just say that because real people, especially women, don't organize anymore. There is no pushback against putting diabetes in cereal. But clearly, it is the intelligent minorities which need to make you. I said it that way on purpose. But clearly, it is the intelligent minorities which need to make use of propaganda continuously and systematically. In the active proselytizing minorities in whom selfish interests and public interests coincide lie the progress and development of America. Only through the active energy of the intelligent few can the public at large become aware of and act upon new ideas. Small groups of persons can and do make the rest of us think what they please about a given subject. But there are usually proponents and opponents of every propaganda, both of whom are equally eager to convince the majority. Boom, bam, done. That's the end of chapter 2.
It's like very, very PMC. Like Bernay's is kind of ahead of the pack in a lot of shit, and he's like, no, hey, trust me, guys. Like, I know what's going on. Like, my uncle's the motherfucker, and so I kind of get psychology a little bit. And I am a PMC dude, and I don't want to lose my status. I don't want to lose my position. So I'm going to do this noble lie bullshit.
Right.
And it's I don't know, it's stark. It's shocking to see him just come out and say all this.
Yeah. Well, and this is why we need to just actually do an exegetical B-side, just do the whole thing of the scientific principles of management. Because basically I'm thinking Du Bois's Talented Tenth, this by Bernay's propaganda, and then also Walter Lippmann and his bit on public opinion, which goes right along with this, that goes hand in hand. And then Frederick Winslow Taylor, his Principles of Scientific Management, forms the nexus of what everybody at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale and Princeton was talking about in the lunchrooms, talking about walking between buildings, how they saw themselves in that decade, the most pivotal decade of American history.
Yeah, the progressive era.
Right.
And I like to use that language, and it's probably more confusing, and it's probably not, it doesn't have much utility, but I do like to use the language to call these people the progressives, because they were the progressives. They are the progressives. And the contemporary progressives are doing this shit. They're just putting a paint job on it where they're like, no, we care about the workers. Right. We care about material conditions. No, you don't. It's just neoliberalism. Like, fuck you guys.
And they're learning how to say, instead of trust the market, oh, well, we can do what we want. We can just print money and throw it at whatever we want. They're learning how to say sock dem things again. But the pendulum swings between social democracy and neoliberalism. And no matter which way it swings, it's serving these people, right? And I think one of the things that has to be pointed out about this text is that this might be like the original PMC, like saying this is how the world works, when in reality they're saying this is how the world could work if you pay for me to be a consultant. And so How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie is another piece in that vein, where he writes it, this is how things work, this is how people work, this is how we do things. But in reality,
that came out in the 30s?
I think so.
I mean, that came out shortly after this. Yeah, so the same era, the same progressive impetus going on. Yeah.
And he's selling himself as a consultant in the same way that Bernay's is. Bernay's is not a professor who's trying to seek or secure or maintain his tenure. He is instead someone who built a name brand recognition for himself that got it so far, and he was so successful in building that with these principles that he is sharing, that he was able to get a retainer, an annual retainer from the Columbia Rope Factory for $50,000 per year. And what that means is, because normal working people don't get put on retainer, it just means that it's permission to call him up on the phone and get him to actually consult with them. So it's like the president of Columbia Rope Factory was getting paid less than a guy who they just had to call on the phone every once in a while to ask, hey, what's your opinion about how we're going to do this ad campaign? He was getting paid more than the president at the time. And with inflation and everything, you just got to know $50,000 was a lot of fucking money. It's more than $1 million nowadays, right? So, and that was for sitting on his ass, right? Yeah. So,
well, not to mention all the work he did with the fucking CIA and the Dulles brothers.
See, and I don't know anything about that. I know nothing about any of that. Should we save that for the next chapter? Like, because we should probably get back to reading, but
yeah, I think actually, I can't remember if it's chapter 5 or 6 when he specifically calls out politicians. But that for me was like, oh, this. I think it's chapter 5, but chapter 5 and 6, and I think chapter 8, in my opinion, are the 3 like standout chapters. But also, you need this like beginning, like the groundwork that he's doing, because he really is telling you like what he is doing. He's like, no, look, I'm going to tell you why you need to trick people, why you need to manipulate people. But yeah, we should save that discussion for later because it is kind of sensational. Whatever.
Well, but it's also just as far as the art of seduction goes, we should keep delaying gratification on the juiciest bit, because I actually didn't know anything about him working with the CIA or doing genocide, much less like psyops in the South America. But that does tie in very nicely to the surprise event that we will be doing later today, at the end of the day, which, by the way, it's happening. I don't think I told you that, Nance, but it is happening. It's going down.
Stoked.
Yeah, man. No, this is going to be historical. Okay.
Chapter 3, the new propagandists.
Can we?
Oh.
I want to make.
You want me to share my screen?
Yes, please. Well, okay. No, wait. That'll mess up how I'm doing everything.
Okay.
I just realized it'll mess up how I'm doing everything. No, okay. We'll carry on. I don't want to have to change my OBS settings.
Chapter 3, the new propagandists. Who are the men who, without our realizing it, give us our ideas, tell us whom to admire and whom to despise, what to believe about the ownership of public utilities, about the tariff, about the price of rubber, about the Dawes Plan, 1924 International Order for Germany's Reparation after World War I, about immigration. Those who tell us how our houses should be designed, what furniture we should put into them, what menus we should serve on our table, what kind of shirts we must wear, what sports we should indulge in, what plays we should see, what charities we should support, what pictures we should admire, what slang we should affect, what jokes we should laugh at. If we set out to make a list of the men and women who, because of their position in public life, might fairly be called the molders of public opinion, we could quickly arrive at an extended list of persons mentioned in Who's Who. The list would obviously include the President of the United States and the members of his cabinet, the senators and representatives in Congress, the governors of our states, the presidents of the chambers of commerce in our 100 largest cities, the chairman of the boards of directors of our 100 or more largest industrial corporations, the president of many of the labor unions affiliated in the American Federation of Labor, the national president of each of the national professional and fraternal organizations, the president of each of the racial or language societies in the country, the 100 leading newspaper and magazine editors, the 50 most popular authors, the presidents of the 50 leading charitable organizations, the 20 leading theatrical or cinema producers, the 100 recognized leaders of fashion, the most popular and influential clergymen in the 100 leading cities, the presidents of our colleges and universities, and the foremost members of their faculties, the most powerful financiers in Wall Street, the most noted amateurs of sport, and so on. Such a list would comprise several thousand persons, but it is well known that many of these leaders are themselves led, sometimes by persons whose names are known to few. Many a congressman, in framing his platform, follows the suggestions of a district boss whom few persons outside the political machine have ever heard of. Eloquent divines may have great...
Wait.
Oh.
Many a congressman in framing his platform follows the suggestions of a district boss whom few persons outside the political machine have heard of. I just wanted to point out that The Tyranny of Structurelessness by, I'm forgetting her name in the moment, but there's this wonderful essay called The Tyranny of Structurelessness, and she talks about how usually to really know who is running a show, you look to who the leaders or the so-called leaders look to in moments of decision. And the fact is like in any society that doesn't have a formal structure, you have to do that. But if there is a formal structure, it's supposed to mitigate that tendency. It's supposed to make it, because if you have a structureless community, the people who have the most power usually don't take on positions of power. The people who take on positions of power ultimately are charismatic spokesmen for the people who like to stay in the shadows. Okay. That's just always the case, though. I mean, that's the case everywhere. If you go into social spaces and you haven't learned to see it already, you got to start looking for it. Okay, let's carry on.
Eloquent divines may have great influence in their communities, but often take their doctrines from a higher ecclesiastical authority. The presidents of chambers of commerce mold the thought of local businessmen concerning public issues, but the opinions which they promulgate are usually derived from some national authority. A presidential candidate may be drafted in response to overwhelming popular demand, but it is well known that his name may be decided upon by half a dozen men sitting around a table in a hotel room. In some instances, the power of invisible wire pullers is flagrant. The power of the invisible cabinet that deliberated at the poker table in a certain little greenhouse in Washington has become a national legend. There was a period in which the major policies of the national government were dictated by a single man. Mark Hanna. He used his considerable wealth and a dash of propaganda to get President William McKinley elected twice. A man like William Joseph Simmons, who received the KKK, who revived the KKK in 1915 May, for a few years, succeeded in marshalling millions of men on a platform of intolerance and violence. Such persons typify in the public mind the type of ruler associated with the phrase invisible government. But we do not often stop to think that there are dictators in other fields whose influence is just as decisive as that of the politicians I have mentioned. A woman like Irene Castle can establish the fashion of short hair that dominates 90% of the women who make any pretense to being fashionable. Paris fashion leaders set the mode of the short skirt. In 1900, any woman wearing one would have been arrested and thrown in jail. The entire women's clothing industry, capitalized at hundreds of millions of dollars, must be reorganized to conform to these leaders' thoughts. There are invisible rulers who control the destinies of millions. It is not generally realized to what extent the words and actions of our most influential public men are dictated by shrewd persons operating behind the scenes, nor, what is still more important, the extent to which our thoughts and habits are modified by authorities. In some departments of our daily life, in which we imagine ourselves free agents, we are ruled by dictators exercising great power. A man buying a suit of clothes imagines that he is choosing, according to his taste and his personality, the kind of garment which he prefers. In reality, he may be obeying the orders of an anonymous gentleman tailor in London. This person is the silent partner in a modest tailoring establishment, which is patronized by gentlemen of fashion and princes of the blood. He suggests to British noblemen and others a blue cloth instead of gray, 2 buttons instead of 3, or sleeves a quarter of an inch narrower than last season. The distinguished customer approves of this idea. But how does this fact affect John Smith of Topeka? The gentleman tailor is under contract with a certain large American firm, which manufactures men's suits, to send them instantly the designs of the suits chosen by the leaders of London fashion. Upon receiving the designs, with specifications as to color, weight, and texture, the firm immediately places an order with the cloth makers for several $100,000 worth of cloth. The suits made up according to the specifications are then advertised as the latest fashion. The fashionable men in New York, Chicago, Boston, and Philadelphia wear them. And the Topeka man, recognizing this leadership, does the same. Women are just as subject to the commands of invisible government as are men. A silk manufacturer, seeking a new market for its product, suggested to a large manufacturer of shoes that women's shoes should be covered with silk to match their dresses. The idea was adopted and systematically propagandized. A popular actress was persuaded to wear the shoes. The fashion spread. The shoe firm was ready with the supply to meet the created demand, and the silk company was ready with the silk for more clothes. More shoes, sorry. The man who injected this idea into the shoe industry was ruling women in one department of their social lives. Different men rule us in the various departments of our lives. There may be one power behind the throne in politics, another in the manipulation of the federal discount rate, and still another in the dictation of next season's dances. If there were a national invisible cabinet ruling our destinies, a thing which is not impossible to conceive of, it would work through certain group leaders on Tuesday for one purpose, and through an entirely different set on Wednesday for another. The idea of invisible government is relative. There may be a handful of men who control the educational methods of the great majority of our schools. Yet from another standpoint, every parent is a group leader with authority over his or her children. The invisible government tends to be concentrated in the hands of the few because of the expense of manipulating the social machinery that controls the opinions and habits of the masses. To advertise on a scale that will reach 50 million people is expensive. To reach and persuade the group leaders who dictate the public's thoughts and actions is likewise expensive. For this reason, there is an increasing tendency to concentrate the functions of propaganda in the hands of the propaganda specialist. This specialist is more and more assuming a distinct place and function in our national life. New activities call for new nomenclature. The propagandist who specializes in interpreting enterprises and ideas to the public, and in interpreting the public to promulgators of new enterprises and ideas, has come to be known by the name of Public Relations Counsel. The new profession of public relations has grown up because of the increasing complexity of modern life and the consequent necessity for making the actions of one part of the public understandable to other sectors of the public. It is due, too, to the increasing dependence of organized power of all sorts upon public opinion. Governments, whether they are monarchical, constitutional, democratic, or communist, depend upon acquiescent public opinion for the success of their efforts and, in fact, government is only government by virtue of public acquiescence. Industries, public utilities, educational movements, indeed all groups representing any concept or product, whether they are majority or minority ideas, succeed only because of approving public opinion. Public opinion is the unacknowledged partner in all broad efforts. And this kind of inversion of base and superstructure, I mean, that's to me all that it is, and it's only become more complete since this was written 100 years ago.
Can you contextualize I know that anybody who watched lecture 1 of the CMT course is going to know, but can you kind of recontextualize what you mean by this inversion of base and superstructure, and do it by reading the important parts of that quote there?
So,
because I feel like this is the most important insight that's been brought up today, right?
We are in a situation, a social situation, an economic situation, maybe, where the culture industry and cultural products and I guess this kind of looser idea of like commodities matters much more to capital and to the engines of industry than actual physical things. Like it used to be the case that everything that mattered was made in a factory, and in the factory there were dozens or hundreds or even thousands of factory workers, and they could organize and they could build a group solidarity, and so they had a little bit of power to kind of dictate their own material or their working conditions, and they could like band together and fight for weekends and 8-hour work days and the reduction of child labor and blah 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 and all that stuff. But sometime, and I don't know when, I'm sure there's lots of different ideas about when, but right around the same time that like modernity was really coming into full effect, and with that post-modernity, maybe the turn of the century, maybe after the Industrial Revolution, the World Wars, I don't know. But it became the case that cultural products were more maybe near the heart of the engine than actual physical products. I'm all over the place right now, dude. I'm like lost.
It's okay. So basically, base and superstructures typically, the reason that these terms even exist is because Marxists theorize that you can cut out the superstructure, focus on the base, organize the superstructure in a way that is made to change the base because the base overdetermines everything else. So the idea is that the base is the productive relations in society. It's the means of production and the people who work those means of production to create the commodities that everybody else presupposes in order to live. And the superstructure includes the political apparatus, it includes the educational apparatus, it includes the media apparatus, it includes ideologies that people believe or express, arguments about ideology. All of that superstructural, and it's considered in the traditional Marxist worldview downstream, as in change the base, superstructure will then also change. And so that informs the practice of people like Lenin, who say, okay, we're just going to cut to what's real. We're going to just focus on getting the main workers in the main factories to organize. And if we can seize those means of production, then everything else will follow. The point is that this changes things. And so can you, does that help a little bit in as far as bringing it back to this now?
Because of the increasing complexity of modern life and the consequent necessity for making the actions of one part of the public understandable to other sectors of the public, it is due to the increasing dependence of organized power on all sorts upon public opinion. Sorry, dude, hold on. I just got a weird tech. Hold on. So we're in this situation now where it's like we're all being pulled along by the dick. And I say it like that because we're being pulled along by our libidinal investments. And we're all being like tricked into shit by the government and by organizations and corporations and blah 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 blah. We're being tricked into stuff, and they usually use like identity categories to get us invested. But it doesn't really matter because none of it's real and everything is the same as everything else. Everything is flattened. And we don't have any real power. And this kind of goes back to earlier, the power dynamics of groups and consumer demographics. We don't have real power anymore, at least as individuals. And because we have been so hyper individuated, collective action isn't really a thing that we see for real. We see it like LARPed all the time, but we don't actually see it play out for real.
Right.
So we don't have power to act. We don't have power to change the world around us. But we're made to believe that we have power, and we're made to believe that in order to maintain the power that we have, which again, we really don't, but we believe that we do, But we believe that in order to maintain that, we have to just accept things as they are. And that's continue consuming. Like, you can want, like, you can have hopes and dreams, and you can have all this stuff, and you could be like, yeah, someday it would be nice to move and buy a house and blah, 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 all the things that we all want. But like in the course of our daily lives, in order to maintain, there's just so many things that we assume we have to just accept it, and we have to take it in stride and take it on the chin. For many people, functionally, they do have to, because the alternative is destitution and homelessness and starvation, and that's never cool. But because we have been so alienated and so atomized from ourselves, and thus any idea of any collectivity, of any collective action, we don't really have a real choice. And we do, but it's hard to make that choice. It's difficult. It takes money, and it takes work, and it takes isolation, and it takes all these things that are really unreasonable to ask most normal people to put up with and to pay that price, because it's hard enough already as it is for what they got to do. They got to work 60 hours, and they got to get shamed and fucking degraded, right. And they're always constantly like second guessing themselves, and they're being gaslit into thinking they're worthless unless they work overtime, and blah blah blah. But gaslit
to think that they have to pick up weekends, or else they wouldn't really have their job, even though there's plenty of people working there who just take the weekend for granted. And so for some fucking reason, you keep finding yourself doing that, even though you technically don't have to, but you would have to develop some soft skills. And those soft skills are really not taught in high school. They're saved for the college educated elite. So,
yeah. And then we're also kind of gaslit into thinking, just by virtue of my position as a working class person, I'm somehow qualitatively different than those who were born into families that can support college tuition for their children, blah, 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 blah. And we're also made to think like, oh, if I don't get on social media and like speak out against X, then that means I'm a person belonging to Y category, and Y category is bad. Y category is deplorable. And all the other things that we all know and we all talk about. But all that to say, like the prevailing order of the day is this superstructural bullshit. It's culture industry bullshit. It's political affiliation. It's oh, that's so sweet.
There you go. Hi.
Oh my God, Anne just brought me a burrito and a peach. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I love you. I'm enjoying listening to this.
Oh, you're here.
I'm here. Yeah.
I didn't know you were in here.
Loneliness intensifies.
Christopher, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm giving you a Zoom hug right now, dude.
We're all giving you a Zoom hug right now.
That's all I need. Thank you.
That is all I need. I am a machine. All I need is words on a screen.
What the fuck, dude?
It's not like that every day. But you know, that's the fantasy. We just captured the fantasy. This is the moment. This is like, wow, I forgot to nourish myself. All right. So thank you, Ann. Yeah, were you mid-thought, or is that pretty much it? Base and superstructure of swap places.
Yeah, and I do think that's a huge point that that is maybe disregarded by some subset of Marxists.
Most, we can say most. We can say that quite comfortably.
Yeah, well,
I think that we most. Okay, well, at the actual event in Chicago, and we have the platypus people in the crowd, I might just do it by show of hands. Tell me how many of you all think that that base really is still more important than superstructure. You know, there's of course going to be the people who say, oh, it's dialectical, and so it's, you know, the two change with the other. You know, they're interlocked and they change one another, and so it gets blurry.
I would defend that position. I'd like an earnest position. If that position in earnest, I would absolutely defend it. And but I do think right now, like if you were to look at the main currents of
Marxism. The 3-volume work by Kulikowski. What's his name? Kulikowski wrote a 3-volume. Yeah, he wrote a 3-volume work called Main Currents of Marxism. So that's the little joke there, everybody. Anyway, keep going.
If you were to take a snapshot of material conditions right now, I would say that superstructure is dominant and has been dominant. And I think like postmodernity is just a consequence of that. And I think postmodernity is the same fucking thing as modernity. There's no such thing as modernity. It's been postmodernity all along because it was an inversion of base and superstructure. And we're all being gaslit.
Modernism was, so in your worldview then, modernism as in the high aspirations and the narrative told to us by the founders of liberalism.
By people like Edward Bernays.
Founders of liberalism would go further back to like John Locke and John Stuart Mill. But
categorically, I would put them in the similar category, not the same category. Because Edward Bernays had 100 years to really figure out what was going on and see what was happening.
Yeah, and John Locke was writing before Adam Smith and Marx were even diagnosing industrial capitalism. In fact, there would be no industrial capitalism if not for John Locke's critique of the monarchy, the divine right of kings, and his argument in defense of property and of the rights of the individual. Okay, and so with all of that, the point is that that's all ideology. The rights of the individual, the critique of the monarchy. This is all superstructural stuff. Marxists are focused on the base, and they say no, it's actually the base is determining these things. And the point is you're saying, no, it really has been for like 400 years now. Ideas being asserted as reality, whether they have a bunch of reasons tacked onto them or not, those have changed reality all along, and that Bernays is just making explicit something that they all were gaming, whether they knew it or not. They were gaming this thing, right?
Yeah.
But what would you say that anything Bernays is saying would have been true prior to newspapers and the printing press and all of that? Or might
maybe in a sense, but it wasn't. Maybe the degree of efficacy changed. I do think this shit goes back pretty far. Like I believe that the tentacles spread deeply into history. But I think with the printing press and with industrialization, and maybe radio kicked it up a notch. Maybe radio is where it really came into effect. But yeah, for sure.
Okay. Now I'm gonna take it back here, starting with which paragraph? What sentence does it start with? The Council on
Governments. Or you want to go one back?
Is it called? No, I'm trying to find it. What is it?
The one we
Where are we?
Just read starts with the new profession of public relations has grown up. The last one I read is governments, whether they are monarchical, constitutional, democratic, or communist.
I can't find that. Governments. It starts with the word governments.
Mm-hmm. Governments, whether they are monarchical, constitutional, democratic, or communist.
I'm just going to word search communist, and I'm sure it'll bring me there.
I think it might be the only time he uses it.
There we go. Oh, That's not, in mine, that's not the beginning of a paragraph.
Oh.
That is actually, in mine, mid-paragraph. I will go to the top of where it begins for me. The new profession of public relations has grown up because of the increasing complexity of modern life and the consequent necessity for making the actions of one part of the public understandable to other sectors of the public. It is due to the increasing dependence of organized power of all sorts upon public opinion. Governments, whether they are monarchical, constitutional, democratic, or communist, depend upon acquiescent public opinion for the success of their efforts, and in fact, government is only government by virtue of public acquiescence, which is to say, like, I think, consent. Industries, public utilities, educational movements, indeed all groups representing any concept or product, whether they are majority or minority ideas, succeed only because of approving public opinion. Public opinion is the unacknowledged partner in all broad efforts. This is why it's a truism. Without the consent of the governed or the will of the governed, no policy or law that gets made is ever going to actually work. So the Public Relations Council, then, is the agent who, working with modern media of communication and the group formations of society, brings an idea to the consciousness of the public. But he is a great deal more than that. He is concerned with courses of action, doctrines, systems, and opinions, and the securing of public support for them. He is also concerned with tangible things such as manufactured and raw products. He is concerned with public utilities, with large trade groups and associations representing entire industries. He functions primarily as an advisor to his client, very much as a lawyer does. Remember, this is Bernay's selling himself as a consultant. He is writing his role and function into existence with this book. So he's speaking of himself in the third person so that other people can take on the mantle of this function. So if you want to be a consultant, this is the Bible. This is the original gospel, right? He functions primarily as an advisor to his client, very much as a lawyer does. A lawyer concentrates on the legal aspects of his client's business. A counsel on public relations concentrates on the public contracts of his client's business. Every phase of his client's ideas, products, or activities which may affect the public or in which the public may have an interest is part of his function. For instance, in the specific problems of the manufacturer, he examines the product, the markets, the way in which the public reacts to the product, and the attitude of the employees to the public and towards the product, and the cooperation of the distribution agencies. The Council on Public Relations, after he has examined all these and other factors, endeavors to shape the actions of his client so that they will gain the interest, the approval, and the acceptance of the public. The means by which the public is apprised of the actions of his client are as varied as the means of communication themselves, such as conversation, letters, the stage, the motion picture, the radio, the lecture platform, the magazine, the daily newspaper. In short, for CMT people, media. The Council on Public Relations is not an advertising man, but he advocates advertising where that is indicated. Very often he is called in by an advertising agency to supplement its work on behalf of a client. His work and that of the advertising agency do not conflict with or duplicate each other. His first efforts are naturally devoted to analyzing his client's problems and making sure what he has to offer the public is something which the public accepts or can be brought to accept. It is futile to attempt to sell an idea or to prepare the ground for a product that is basically unsound. Oh, really? For example, an orphan asylum is worried by a falling off in contributions and a puzzling attitude of indifference or hostility on the part of the public. The Council on Public Relations may discover upon analysis that the public, alive to modern sociological trends, subconsciously criticizes the institution because it is not organized on the new cottage plan. He will advise modification of the client in this respect. Or a railroad may be urged to put on a fast train for the sake of the prestige which it will lend to the road's name and hence to its stocks and bonds. So basically, it is the role of the public relations expert to kind of feel the public's pulse, meaning the best friend of the public relations expert is going to be psychologists and sociologists who work with statisticians to read big data and and figure out what is generally going to get either a less bad reaction or what kinds of crazy reactions something might get from fringes that secures it as normal for the mainstream. If the corset makers, for instance, wished to bring their product into fashion again, he would unquestionably advise that the plan was impossible since women have definitely emancipated themselves from the old style corset. Yet his fashion advisors might report that women might be persuaded to adopt a certain type of girdle which eliminated the unhealthful features of the corset. Yeah, like for instance, it's called a sports bra. His next effort is to analyze his public. He studies the groups which must be reached and the leaders through whom he may approach these groups. Social groups, economic groups, geographical groups, age groups, doctrinal groups, language groups, cultural groups. All these represent the divisions through which, on behalf of his client, he may talk to the public. But of course, people just turn to the internet and think that's the public because we're not thinking structurally. I like this, but I'm wondering if how much is left to this chapter? Mikey just hopped in the chat.
It's, I think, 3 pages, 3.5 pages, maybe.
Okay, for me, it's a few more because I have really big font, I guess. But we're gonna finish these last. Wait a minute. Hold on. Mikey, are you there?
Yeah, I was just testing out Zoom. I'm at a coffee shop, so I know it's
All right.
loud, but I was just making sure Zoom was working for me, so I didn't need to like turn my computer off for later.
Hang tight because we've got 20 minutes here before Swole's going to come on for the dialectics of fitness and health talk that he's going to give. And we were already going overtime with this because we bumped our multilingualism segment until later. And so Nance and I need to talk to you. And so everybody who's on the listening side of this, on the recorded version, we're going to go have a super secret conversation that only Anne and Christopher will be privy to. Take care. Sometimes only the live audience gets to know. That's just the way it is. All right. Take care, everybody. Peace. We'll continue this soon.